Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's really actually exciting and meaningful for me to be here because I actually started my career here in Brisbane a very long time ago. And I've been outside of Australia for a good 19 years now, so it's been a while, but I'm very pleased to be here and sharing a lot of knowledge. In case you do want to provide any feedback, please do use the app. But also, I'll be around in the breaks if you'd like to also give me feedback or ask questions as well, and I'll try to make sure that we have some time at the end in case you have any questions that you would like to ask. As Lorraine was saying, I've been around for a while, and I've written a number of books, and one of the books that's kind of related to this is the one in the middle called Talking with Tech Leads. Published this actually 10 years ago, and at that time there weren't really many books around leading or managing, particularly in technical sort of worlds. And yeah, I found it really interesting to talk to other people about how to get better at this. And so if this is a path that you're really interested in, that might be something interesting for you, but also you have a lot of different colleagues around you in your companies or in Brisbane as a community. So start talking to them and maybe exploring what that might look like for you. These days, I run my own company called the Tech Lead Academy, and I like to provide training to technical leaders and engineering managers, and I also like to coach CTOs and VPs of engineering one-to-one, so basically helping everyone on their technical leadership journey in tech. I've been a developer, I've been leading technical teams, I've worked as a CTO, and so I can give lots of different perspectives around each of them, and I hope to give you some really good insights in what it means to think about the technical leadership path. All right. So let's start by talking about what do I mean by technical leadership, right? So you might be thinking, well, what is management and leadership, and what's the differences between that? And so I want to sort of give a little bit of clarification around what technical leadership means. And then, of course, we are sort of thinking about, is this something that you want to do? And so I also want to give you some good reasons about thinking about this as a potential career path, or even an option to try out at some point in your particular career. Now, if you are already sort of thinking about that, you're probably also wondering, well, maybe this is for me. How do I get started? And so I'd also like to give you some tips about practical things you can do when you go back to the workplace about stepping into technical leadership roles. So let's start by talking about exploring technical leadership. And I want to start with a little bit of a story. I've been around for a while, and one of the interesting things that I've really appreciated from consulting is you get to work in lots of different environments. And many years ago, one of the environments in which I was working, this was probably in the sort of before, just as smartphones were starting to come out, the iPhone had come out, but there was still a bit of a competition for, smartphones and trying to be the leader around that. And one of the companies that I was working with was a telecommunications company, and they wanted to build a social media app. Now, strategically, this made quite a lot of sense, because one of the things is if you had really tight integration with your phone and a social media app, you have a lot of contacts of who you might need to call, reach out to, then you sort of start to become the hub of wanting to, be everyone's sort of main app, and also then, of course, coupled to the telecommunication services and then the network. So strategically, it made a lot of sense to invest in a social media app. Facebook had sort of just come out, but it hadn't really reached worldwide adoption yet, so there was still a lot of competition in the market to becoming the sort of social media app for a lot of different people. And so the telecommunications company decided to go about building a social media app that would then be tightly integrated with their phone that you could then buy as a subscriber, and of course, then you're embedded in their ecosystem. Now, if you've worked for a telecommunications company, and I've worked with several of them, none of them here in Australia, but you probably all know that telecommunications companies have a lot of history and therefore also a lot of legacy. And perhaps they start thinking a little bit of IT rather than tech, and so they treat technology a little bit differently than what we think about with modern product technologies. And so the way that this company was starting to go about building the social media app was thinking about buying companies. Right? It's like, that company has a really interesting onboarding process, that company has a really good messaging service, that company is really good with outreach and contacts and social sharing, so let's go out and buy a few companies, and then let's try to make a social media app out of them. In the end, they end up buying about 8 different companies, and then tried to get all of these companies to work together. At some point, they were sort of working on this program for 12 months by the time that I joined. We were there to try to help them get back on schedule because they were already 6 months behind. Now, I'm pretty sure that many of you have worked in environments where companies are trying to work across. This was made a little bit more complicated because many of these were distributed across the European continent. And as you might imagine, there are many strong different cultural differences across countries that made working together a lot harder. Now, when you're thinking about this from a technology perspective, you're probably thinking, okay, well, there's a lot of different complication with integration. But if you're talking to business people or people who don't really understand technology, of course, they're thinking, how hard could this be, right? And you all know it's tremendously hard. As much as we love to talk about highly cohesive, decoupled architectures, the reality is we do build a bit of a mess. And often uncoupling that mess takes some time. And so when you're trying to remove something like user registration and maybe connect it to a different one, it might logically seem really easy, but in reality, we know it's a lot harder than it looks. And so, management, we're very much about just delete all those things that we don't need and then just get them all working together. And a bit of an interesting challenge. Now, I was only on this project for a short amount of time, trying to help one of the services go live. We actually did manage to get that go live, but the whole program was a bit of a sort of train wreck. And one of the interesting things following this a lot longer was definitely this overall program was delayed. So what was originally planned as an 18-month launch ended up launching in 3 years' time, so almost double the amount of time that they'd hoped for. What they hoped to do was support lots of different mobile phones, because the more phones you supported, the more people would use the app, the more people would pay for subscriptions. And of course, given the delays, they could only really go live with 2 phones. Does anyone remember the Microsoft phone? Yeah, that was one of them. Not even the iPhone was one of the other ones. It was one of the other sort of Nokia phones. And so they kind of went live with, maybe 2 bets, hoping that they were the right ones. Unfortunately, they were perhaps the wrong bets at the time. And of course, when they went live with a MVP, if you were a user, why would you use this thing? Facebook were coming out with really rich content. You could poke your friends, right? You could interact with different people. There were like fun new things. And why should I just sign up for a social app that just allowed me to send messages to contacts? I could kind of do that without being embedded into a social network app. And so this app didn't really reach a lot of success. And they ended up, as you can imagine, throwing this out of the window. So a lot of time and money spent on buying companies, a lot of time and money trying to get something launched into the market, and then not really a strong uptake, which was strategically made sense, but just very poorly executed. And so for me, when I think about this, it's a really good example of a lack of technical alignment, and it has real-world consequences. When we think about this in our own environments, a lot of them manifest as bugs, right? Things that we don't want the software to do, or the things we didn't mean to do, but it does. A lot of the times, it's also about complexity, right? And part of our jobs as engineers is to be able to manage that complexity so that we can continue to make changes to the systems that we work on. Now, this company, in this particular case, also had a really poor user experience. So as you transition from one part of the app to the other, you could almost feel it was written by a different company, just from the way that you would sort of interact with some of the features. And so it was a little bit of a Frankenstein kind of app that made it really hard for people to actually want to use, because it was really sort of cobbled together. And then, of course, the consequences that we saw here, which was really long delays, which meant they really missed their market opportunity with really capturing a good part of the market share. So imagine when you're working on a system, right, and you have a system which lacks technical alignment. What does that feel like? Well, one of the things that you're often doing is you're always building new things, right? So you have to implement a new feature. What are the things that you do? You don't simply just go to Copilot and ask it to do something. You have to kind of look through the code base. Well, you should kind of look through the code base to see what things are actually, how things are currently implemented. And then you suddenly go, wow, we have 10 different ways to raise an event. Like, which one do I follow? And then, what changes do I have to actually make? You realize, well, now my own task is going to be a lot harder. And so this is a really good example of a lack of technical alignment. And what we're talking about here is unneeded complexity. Now, this old paper, reading papers is really useful, but this one was published in 1987, and it's still really relevant, called No Silver Bullet. And in this, Fred Brooks talks about 2 types of complexity. Right? One of them is the type of essential complexity. These are the things that we have to do because we are asked to do it. Right? It's part of the domain or the product complexity. And then there's the accidental complexity of the things we have to do in order to get the essential complexity done. Now, one of the things that I really love about technology is we improve our ways of working. And so over time, hopefully with smart engineering practices, with great advances in technology, we reduce the level of accidental complexity over time. We can't get rid of it completely, but we do improve it. So as a really good concrete example, if we think about programming languages, if you ever worked in C or have worked in C, one of the things that you have to do all the time is think a lot about memory management, right? You have to allocate memory, you have to use that memory, and then you have to deallocate that memory if you want a functional program. In the Java world, we don't really think about that so much, right? We just kind of use our variables, and then we assume the garbage collector will take care of it. It's a really good example of reducing accidental complexity over time, because we can just focus on the business problem rather than thinking about the mechanics of how we're going to implement it, at least to some degree. We've also seen a lot of advances of this in the infrastructure world, right? So in the hosted world, when I first started working, if you had to launch software, you really had to think long and hard about the infrastructure or the servers that you wanted. You had to put an order list together of the types of machines you wanted, and you had to give our infrastructure people enough time to order these things, to install these things, to set these things up, and also you had to make sure that it was going to scale to the levels that you wanted. So a lot of unnecessary complexity. Now in the cloud world, we should still think about what type of machines that we want, but it's a lot easier, right? If we want a small machine with low memory footprint, we can do that. If we want a machine with like a high a data store, we can do that really easily, and it's almost like instantaneous today, right? So that, again, accidental complexity has reduced over time. Now, as we think about software and programming, we can also think about this in terms of abstractions. And one of the things that we tend to do is thinking about good programming level abstractions, right? But sometimes the wrong abstraction can make our work a lot more complicated. And this is the hard thing. Abstractions by themselves are not bad, but inappropriately applied, they can be. I'm sure you've all worked on some software where somebody thought, you know what I'm going to do? This is really hard. We're going to want to do this in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this wonderful framework. I'm going to make this thing where you can configure something, maybe in YAML or JSON. You can configure the fields that you want. And then with some sort of script, we can generate all of these different things, and it never gets used. Now you come along, and then you have to implement a business feature, and then you kind of think, well, now I have to make all of these changes to this sort of configuration script, and it's going to take a lot of effort just to make your own small functional change. And so inappropriate abstractions can prevent us, which is one of the reasons we rely on tools like simple code, refactoring, and patterns, appropriate patterns, to make our job easier. And so for me, one of the reasons why we need technical alignment is to help us manage this level of complexity. And when you have a lack of technical leadership, it's just going to increase your accidental complexity, which at the end of the day makes your job a lot harder. So if there's any good reason, it's almost a little bit selfish. If you want to do a really good job, you want strong technical leadership, but it's not going to just benefit you, it's going to benefit everyone in your team as well. I keep talking about the term technical leadership, and you're like, well, what do you even mean, Pat, right? Now, I think it's useful to sort of think about the base word leadership, and there are many different definitions. You look it up on dictionary.com or the Oxford Dictionary, you'll get like 15, and it is kind of fuzzy. I mean, I've been studying this field for about 15 years. But for me, it's really, really simple, and my favorite definition in the context of technical leadership is this one here. The act of aligning a group of people. That's it. So what you might notice here, it's about what you do. It's not about what your role is called. So often you might think about a formal leader or manager, and they don't demonstrate leadership, right? You think that they are just there, but they're not really doing anything. But similarly, when you're on a team, you have a lot of opportunity to demonstrate leadership as well, to take an act to help create alignment with a group of people. Now, what do I mean by in a technical context? Typically, in our world, where we get a lot of deviation is that accidental complexity, right? And often one of the ways that accidental complexity increases is from the tools and libraries that we use. Right? So you might have your favorite testing library, somebody else has a different testing environment, library, and then you end up with 2 or 3 different variations on your project. So the tools and libraries are kind of one of the places where I would look for misalignment. But another place, which is a little bit harder to spot, is kind of more about our process, right? We all have our favorite ways of working, And when you have a whole bunch of people put together working in a team, then you're definitely going to get some differences about how people work, right? So how many of you use GitHub or GitLab here? A lot of you. Now, if you're doing that, you probably have some sort of pull request review process. I always look for this on teams for opportunities of misalignment. So let's say that you are using a pull request process. Somebody opens up a pull request review, and one person in your team might just simply quickly scan the code, goes, looks good to me, merge request. All right? Hopefully that's not you. Maybe another person on the team has a pull request review, and they have this little checklist, right? Does it have good documentation? Do they have some good tests? Is it understandable? Is it well modularized? Like, have we refactored this? This is misalignment and an opportunity to demonstrate technical leadership. And so when you see that, regardless of what your title is called, this is an opportunity to flag it, right? The simple way to do this is to simply talk about it with your team. Say, hey, I've noticed that we've got differences in how we do pull request reviews. Why don't we talk about it and at least agree on what our minimum expectation as a team is? By driving that discussion, by driving to a decision, we create more alignment, and you're demonstrating technical leadership. And so, given the complexities of the software that we build, given that teams are rarely the same team, we change people on teams all the time, there is always opportunity for misalignment. And so typically in the context that I'm talking about, a lot of the technical alignment that you'll be thinking about is a bit more in the team, right? So we're trying to create alignment in the product that we're all contributing to as a team. But this is also true at an organizational or enterprise level, is that we can also get misalignment across teams. Teams in an organization have different goals, and so we also need alignment to make sure that the organization is moving the right level. And of course, this side is just simply a lot more difficult than the other side as well. But it is still technical leadership, it just looks a little bit different. So as an example, right, so let's see how we implement email notifications in the system is the right way to do it, rather than saying, oh, I've got a fun way, let me just go play off with this way of implementing email notifications. Similarly, when you do notice these differences, we have different ways to approach error handling, right? We have 5 or 6 different ways of doing this. We should try to get to a common agreement as a team, rather than saying, not my problem, I'll deal with it later, or give it to somebody else to take care of, right? These are all opportunities to demonstrate technical leadership. And so when I'm thinking about teams and highly functional teams, what I'm really looking for, or what I don't want to have, is a group of individuals, each doing their own thing, right? One thing that can happen is work systems that prioritize individual tasks. So as a concrete example, in one of my earliest teams that I worked on, we were sort of working in an agile way. But one of the interesting ways that we worked is that as a developer, so I was a developer on the team, we all had a fixed number of story points or stories that we had to commit to, right? And as a team, you want to help other team members, but that system incentivized me completing my work before helping anyone else. Of course, we wanted to help other people, but at the beginning of an iteration or sprint, it would be like, yeah, have you read the manual? Like, what have you done? What have you tried? Come back to me later. Because I'm worried about helping you is going to be the trade-off about me being able to complete my work. And so that work system disincentivizes us against working together as a team and creates opportunities for misalignment. Similarly, when people have their own ways, right? You see this with new people joining a team. They do it the same way that they used to do it in their old team, but it's often different in the team that you're working or the product that you're working in. And so as a good team member, you should be seeking to see what the patterns are in the existing code base and approach them rather than simply introducing your own way of working because you like it. That's probably the wrong reason to actually introduce differences. So if you do want a strong technical alignment, you're going to end up building a high-performing team. You do need to think about the long-term longevity of the product that you're working on, not just the feature or the story that you're working on. And this really encourages stronger collaboration. And so in my experience, teams who have higher technical alignment perform a lot better because you don't end up doing a lot of rework. You don't have to fix bugs that other people are creating. And your work is just simpler overall because you're not dealing with so much accidental complexity. So it's a win-win for everyone, but it does require some effort. So for me, an investment in the right level of technical alignment helps make future change easier. And this is the reason why this is important on the products that we work on. If you're working on a prototype, throwaway by yourself, it doesn't matter. But in reality, if you want your product to be successful, if you want your product to live on, typically you're going to have to work with other people. Typically, we want to continue making changes to that system, and therefore we really want to invest in the right level of technical leadership to make sure we make future changes easier. So we've talked about what technical leadership is, who is accountable for technical leadership, right? Now, how many of you here have some sort of growth ladder or career framework in your organization? Okay, about 50%. Most organizations will have something like this, right? So where you have a ladder that talks about positions at different levels and maybe the expectation of what you're supposed to do and the impact you're supposed to have. In technology, a very common one is to sort of have a path that looks like this, right? We start off as maybe a less experienced person, we become a sort of contributing engineer or IC, and then we maybe get more experience becoming a senior, and then we might even lead a technical team. In the US, one of the things that you often hear about this is what they describe as the two-track career model. So you don't have to get forced into management. They often talk about two tracks, one which is called the individual contributor track, and one which is called the management track. I hate the name of this tracks. So one of the reasons for this is people at the higher levels of the IC, or individual contributing track, aren't really doing individual contribution, right? Naming is the hardest thing in computer science. This is really poorly named. Now, as much as I hate this model, it is very widely adopted, so I'm not really going to necessarily pretend I can change the industry, but I do believe a much better way of talking about this is talking about what I describe as a Trident model, where most things on what is the individual contribution track is really about technical leadership, and there is a bit more of a true individual contribution track. Most companies do not need that. So as an example, one of the things that you might often see here is you will have, say, team leads or engineering managers on the management track. In this place, they are doing things like people management, right? Hiring, firing, when it comes to performance reviews and trying to make sure that people have like appropriate evaluations. The individual contribution track is what most of our teams are going to be made up of, right? Of junior contributors, a mix of like mid-level and also senior contributors. And then we're going to have a number of technical leaders, and the label is often quite different in many organizations. This could be everything from tech lead, lead developer, architect, or staff engineer. There's a bit of a misuse there where it's like both on the IC and the technical leadership track. But most leadership roles or technical leadership roles will be on that side, not really on the individual contribution track. So when you think about technical leadership, if I'm an individual contributor, I should maintain alignment within my team, right? I'm not necessarily expected to create more alignment. As a senior software engineer, typically you're expected to improve it. So you might have ownership of a small subsection of a product, or in a microservices world, maybe you have ownership of one or two services, and so you should create more alignment, technical alignment within that area. But any of the other ones on the other side here, like the tech lead or the staff engineer, then you're typically supposed to have technical alignment on a product or a set of services. And so this is the accountable party for each of these. Now, one of the reasons I like to use these terms is to sort of think about, well, what are you doing in each of these different roles? Most of you probably don't really know what managers do because they spend a lot of time in meetings, so I can understand that. And you know, one of the things that managers do is valuable, at least good managers. And when I think about this, managers spend like 70 to 80% of their time what I think of as managing the system. Oh, sorry, yeah, individual contributors, you know this one, right? But if you're a manager, one of the things that you're going to be doing is managing budgets. Right? So for some of you, to be able to come to a conference like this, there's probably an approval process, and there's a certain level of budget that you can use. Now, that often has to either be negotiated with if you don't have it, or somebody needs to influence and persuade the people team or finance to release more budget. Of course, organizations also need to have things like plans and estimates because there's often a lot of coordination across the organization. And so a manager is often dealing with what I call organizational bureaucracy, things that you don't have to worry about as a team member, so you can just focus on doing good work, and hopefully your manager is helping you be more effective within your own work environment, right? So if we know what individual contributors do, which are individual contributions, what is it that technical leaders do that is different from being a manager, right? Well, it's in the name, because it's a much better name than individual contribution. So as a technical leader, you're typically leading technical topics and teams, right? So as an example, in a larger organization, when I've been a technical leader, One of the things that I've often had to do is, I'm working on a feature and I need a dependency from another team to make a change maybe to their API or to make some data available, right? They're not just going to magically turn up. I have to go and talk to them. I have to create some agreements with them, maybe about how they're going to expose that API and when they're going to make that API available, because I can't get them to work for me. I have to ask and find out what their plans are and to try to match our team's plans with their plans, so there's a bit of coordination there. And then when they do make that available, I also need to make sure it's got the right quality so that my team's product is not going to be affected if their system goes down or they produce incompatible information. So we're leading technical topics across an organization, and yes, it sometimes does mean meetings, right? Some of the things that you're going to have to do when you're leading a technical team is you're going to have to manage 2 engineers who disagree, right? Because if they disagree and you can't make progress, your team's either not going to make progress, or they're going to start doing their own thing, which is violating our idea of technical alignment and adds to accidental complexity. And so a lot of the activities as a technical leader you're involved in some level of individual contribution, but you're no longer being measured by your individual output, your individual contribution. That's why I think the term IC, individual contribution track, is really poorly named, because you're really responsible for the outcomes of a group of people, and the way you maximize your outcomes is by improving the alignment with the group of people that you're leading, right? And this can be true across the organization. Particularly, there's often what I describe as common infrastructure that you all share, but no one owns. Today, in our sort of Microsoft microservices distributed world, this is probably going to be some sort of shared infrastructure like Kafka or Kinesis, right? Some shared messaging bus. You all use it, but nobody's really responsible and accountable for it. And I've worked with organizations where teams, they do what they like. They put some messages onto this common messaging infrastructure, and it's a mess, right? Some people have weirdly formatted messages. Some teams expect certain retries, but not all the teams are picking up their signals for sending events again and again. And so you can get quite a lot of mess at a large organizational level, and again, accidental complexity that makes our task a lot harder. And so this is a really valuable but important aspect. Now, if you are thinking about stepping into a technical leadership role, don't think you need to be the expert in that area, right? Of course, you need some level of expertise, but you don't necessarily need to be the go-to person for that technology, because a lot of these activities are not really about knowing the ins and outs of some library and framework, right? A lot of this is about leadership. And so my tip for you, if you're thinking about this, is to remember what got you here won't get you to that next step. And you're really going to have to invest in leadership skills. Now, I know maybe a lot of people in technology love games, so I like to use the metaphor of like a role-playing game, right? And in one of the things in role-playing games is you kind of get to make customizations to your character. You get to sort of allocate skill points. Now, in our world, we can allocate skill points across a couple of different dimensions: leadership, development, and architecture skills. And most individual contributors, if you've been working as part of a team, will have allocated all their experience to getting better as a developer. I've read domain-driven design, refactoring, I know how to use these tools. That helps me as an individual contributor. But if you're going to be a technical leader, you need to start allocating skill points to different areas, getting more involved in architectural design discussions and driving some of those activities, building some skills in leadership. And this is typically where I spot most people will have gaps if you're stepping into a technical leadership role. So if this is a path that you're really considering, start to think about diversifying where you invest your personal development skills to start spending time on architectural sort of skills and experiences, and then also some of the leadership skills and experiences you will need if you end up becoming the accountable technical leader. If you're wondering what some of those skills are, particularly the leadership skills, these are more concrete things. And for each of these different skills, there's whole bunches of training, there's whole bunches of books and resources for each of these individual skills. And it's actually very helpful to work on one skill at a time, because just like you just didn't magically become a much better developer, you started researching and upskilling on things like how to write good tests, how to design good code, how to do good database structuring, right? You invested in a skill at a time, and cumulatively, you get better over time. And this is very similar. These are things that you can learn. You'll probably want to take a photo of this, but these are some of the common resources that I recommend again and again. So as an example, one of the books that I really like is The Coaching Habit. It's a really thin book that helps you understand the difference between coaching and mentoring, right? So most individual contributors will be very good at mentoring, right? Here's what I would do in this situation. Here's what I think you should do. That's called giving advice. Coaches do not give advice. They believe that you, as a coach, can help somebody find their own solution. Do not give them the solution. You have to guide them and help them discover their own approach. And The Coaching Habit is a really powerful book that can teach you those skills, and I've also had to learn over time. So hopefully you understand a little bit about what I mean by technical leadership and the differences of what it means to be a technical leader versus a manager. Let's talk about some reasons why this might be for you, right? I've been a developer, and I've written a lot of code, and at some point, we all get bored, right? Do I have to write another CRUD screen, like another web app that just does CRUD, right? Some of this might be, how many times do you have to build a login screen? Like every new product, you have to build a login screen. I remember one colleague that I was working with, and he was complaining to me at the pub in London, Pat, you know what? All I do is write programs that take in JSON, do something, and spit out JSON. I was like, that's the essence of what we do, right? It's like, it might be an event this day or like XML in the past, but that's kind of what programming is all about. And so one really good reason to step into this space is you just build different skills, right? Leading people is hard, but it's also exciting, right? Like how you get to lead a team and create alignment is infinite. There's so many different ways of doing it. And so you can develop lots of different skills that maybe you've never built before. And so it's a great way to actually grow, to not get bored. Another good example here is, sometimes you work with a team that you kind of like, I think we should be doing this, but our tech lead or the formal accountable tech lead is not really doing anything, right? Or maybe you get really annoyed at your team process, right? We have to write a design doc for every single feature. It's a waste. Why are we doing that? Or maybe you have ideas about how to make your team better, but you're not being heard. I think one good reason to step into this is you get to shape the environment you would like to work in, right? Again, it's a little bit of a selfish reason, but it's not just about helping you. You get to work and help your colleagues work in a much better environment as well. And I think this is one of the things that I really love, is often I think about teams that I've worked in, and as a formal technical leader, you get to help your team avoid all of those terrible environments that you've worked in, because you get to shape and craft the environment you work in. Often in an organization, you can't solve every problem, right? But you might think that there's some particular problem that you really want to get resolved. So as an example, maybe there's some tech debt, right? Nobody's removing this old unsupported library. We know that's really outdated. Maybe we could have been involved earlier in product design so we could influence the direction of a particular feature. When you are a formal technical leader, you get invited earlier to certain discussions. And so you get to have sort of greater impact and influence. Now, you're right, is that, why isn't the team involved earlier? That is a organizational dysfunction, but it's also the reality of how most organizations work. Most team members don't want to be involved in every meeting, but if you're not in certain meetings, you can't influence. And that's one of the great things and trade-offs of being in this technical leadership role, is you often get involved in product feature design or maybe buying a particular sort of vendor, right? And you can influence that a lot more if you're invited to have those discussions. And so these roles give you more scope to have greater influence. Sometimes I've worked on teams and I think, well, their tech lead or team lead's not helping this person grow. It's wasting their potential. And I think one side effect about why I have been talking about this topic for almost a decade and love talking about this is you just get to see people shine, right? So it's so nice to see people who've done the workshop before and see where they are now and grown, and to help them have greater impact on the people. And so it's almost like developing other parts of our industry. And we do this day to day, perhaps, coaching and mentoring, but you can have an even greater impact on somebody when you're in these formal technical leadership roles. And when you are simply working in a team, you often have very simple problems. But when you're working at an organizational level, particularly creating alignment across the organization, you're simply dealing with much more complex things, right? And so you can have sort of very unbounded, challenging problems that you can solve by working as a technical leader. All right, we've talked about what technical leadership is. Hopefully you have some good reasons to think, this is for me. Where do you start? Let's talk about this. I have a very simple recipe for you, and the first step is to look for areas of misalignment or neglect. And there's tons of them, right? I talked about how there's a lot of opportunities to, in teams to have misalignment. Let's give you a concrete example. So why does everyone have their special build script, right? In Java world, you might be using Maven or Gradle or something like that. But in other places I've worked in, there's many different ways. People just run their own little thing, maybe in their IDE, maybe other people have written their own custom script. That's an area of misalignment, an opportunity to demonstrate technical leadership. Again, I gave you the example of when you see processes where you notice these slight differences. This is a little bit harder, probably also to observe in a distributed environment because people work differently. But when you do notice these differences of process, you might think that's creating more accidental complexity. Maybe that's a topic we should discuss as a team, agree on a decision about how we'd like to work, and then you create more alignment, so you're demonstrating technical leadership. Again, maybe there's something like a flaky tool or something that we haven't really got rid of, right? Our code bases always have some level of technical debt. This is an opportunity to improve that, to take ownership of this topic, and to potentially improve your life and for others as well. Now, as I said, there's always areas of misalignment, and the important part here is prioritizing. And so the second step of this is really to choose to own the issue. It's kind of weird phrasing, but I've been very intentional about this. Now, I've worked with lots of different teams, and sometimes I've worked with team members who start a lot of things, but don't really finish them. Right? I want to fix this thing over here, and I want to fix this thing over here, and I want to fix this thing over here. And the result is you don't really get progress. One of the hard things about being a technical leader is the feedback loops are a lot longer. And when you're going to own an issue, you're often going to have to get buy-in. Right? You're going to have to talk to your team. Maybe you have to talk to some people outside of your team to make sure that you're creating alignment that is in alignment with the rest of the organization. That requires time. And so some of this is going to require some patience, right? You have to accept that change will take time, and some of this you just have to work off step by step, right? So thinking about what you do to nudge it in this direction this week, to nudge it a little bit more the next week, but to appreciate it's not just going to be done and dusted in one day, because it takes time. Now, when you are owning some particular topic, particularly if you're not a formal technical leader, it is really important to seek sponsorship. Because one of the things that you really want to have when you're introducing change like this is you need to think about your safety, right? You need to think about the scenarios of what if this manager doesn't want me working on this topic? Or what if I choose a particular solution that nobody outside our team will agree with, right? What will happen to you as an individual contributor? It's useful to have a sponsor that will back you up, right? And so when I think about this, I like to think about this as who is your sponsor? Right? It could be your manager. It could be your CTO. Right? Like I'm working on this topic because our CTO wants me to look at it. Right? That is really powerful to have as a safety mechanism to make sure you can work on this in safety. It's really important to work on that. Our fourth step here is really to make sure you deliver value. Right? See the thing that you choose to own right through to the end. Finish what you start, and the best way to demonstrate value is to get things done, really. Ship the thing that you wanted, right? It's not just about talk. Remember, technical leadership is about what you do, the action. And if you're not doing this, you're not driving a result, the next time you ask for sponsorship, someone might say, well, why should I? You haven't finished anything. Why should I trust you this time? And so by delivering value, by demonstrating technical leadership, you'll create a positive reinforcing loop that will hopefully give you more sponsorship for more and more complex problems. And so this is really the way that you work. Celebrate, talk about what you've accomplished, the improvements that you had, and then repeat. And hopefully through this cycle, you demonstrate and you show your ability to demonstrate technical leadership. And this is really the essence of how you find those really formal layers. Because one of the things is you want to give it to somebody who's already shown their capability. So a quick recap of the recipe. Look for areas of misalignment and neglect. Decide to pick a particular issue, but make sure that you have some sponsorship so you can do that in safety. Then make sure you see it through, and then celebrate and repeat. The secret to really becoming a formal technical leader is in following this recipe again and again on many different topics. Because one secret that no managers will tell you is it's simply easier for managers to recognize what you do than what you might do. And so if you're already demonstrating the behavior, people will give you that promotion. So in closing, we've looked at what technical leadership is. Hopefully you have some good reasons about why you want to do these, and hopefully you have a good understanding about where you might start. Thank you very much, and I'd like to open up for any questions you have.